I. Additionally, I believe he was crazy from using heroin. Seriously, it's awful. Kudos to Kurt for living. When it happened, it broke my heart. Christopher Novoselic never tried to be the most well-known. He didn't write the hits, run after fame, or have the same vibe as Kurt Cobain. He also didn't become a new hero like Dave Grohl. Unfortunately, he is the only one left after Kurt killed himself. Nirvana fell apart after only 3 years of fire. As things started to go wrong, Krist quietly pulled away. Not a news conference, a solo show, or a dramatic "I'll be back" announcement. He went away. He was thought to have nothing else to say. But there's a story that needs to be told that's lurking behind the silence. About a man who used to sleep on the floor next to Kurt and saw Nirvana rise and fall. This man had wounds that no one could really see. What kept him from joining Dave Grohl and making Foo Fighters? In what way did politics appeal to him more than music? What happened behind closed doors during the last few days of Nirvana when things were falling apart? People used to call Krist the Shadow, but he might know things about the past that no one else does. And through how he lived, not what he said, he wrote a quiet, lasting new chapter in rock history after one of the saddest and most memorable times in its history. Beginnings. Krist Novoselic was born in Compton, California, which was not designed to take in kids who spoke Croatian as their first language. He moved to America with his family from the island of AJ in search of a better life. They even changed their last name from Novoselic to Novoselic because of a mistake when they were getting their passports. But Krist's feeling of being out of place when they moved to Aberdeen, Washington, a sad town where the American dream often ran into trouble, couldn't be changed. Krist had to have surgery to fix his severely bucked teeth as a child. He was tall, awkward, and spoke Croatian. He had a hard time fitting in and was always the one that nobody else liked at school. At age 15, he was sent to Zadar, Croatia, to live with family for a year. His first experience with punk rock was in a Balkan diner. Sex Pistols' distorted guitars and Iggy Pop's raw shouting. Not only music, it was a language for people who couldn't speak for themselves. Krist was set free. Once he got back to the United States, he became deeply involved with Led Zeppelin's Sabbath and The Who. Later, he started to listen to Devo, the Ramones, and Dead Kennedys. But unlike the other kids who wanted to be lead singers or flashy guitarists, Krist decided to play bass, which isn't the most exciting instrument, but is what holds the band together. The person was quiet and wanted to keep their own beat steady, just like him. Krist wasn't bothered that his first bass was cheap. He worked on every note, learned how to keep the sound steady, and knew that this was the only way he could stay alive. People didn't have to understand the music. That was all you needed to get through the days when no one checked on you. Christoph met Kurt Cobain back then. Cobain was a quiet kid with a blank look on his face who played guitar like he was screaming into space. Krist didn't listen right away when Kurt knocked on his door and gave him a cassette tape of his old band Fecal Matter. He finally hit play after a few months of a strange quiet time. That's when he knew, I have to play music with this guy. That meeting, between two wounded souls, sparked the first flame of what would become Nirvana. Early career. There was no record deal, no vow to change the world, just a cassette tape called Fecal Matter and a long-haired kid named Kurt Cobain who shoved the tape into Krist's hand and said, "Give it a listen." It took Krist Novoselic months to actually listen to that tape. But when he did, he knew. This was the music of the unheard, the voice of outsiders. It was raw, broken, but something about it rang painfully true. And in a dingy room in Aberdeen, Krist nodded. All right, let's start a band. The early days of Nirvana had no spotlight. They were three nobodies, Cobain, Novoselic, and Aaron Burkhart, jamming in garages, sleeping in cars, surviving on instant noodles. When Aaron left, they cycled through other drummers, Dale Crover, Dan Peters, but no one stuck. Not until Dave Grohl arrived, a young drummer from the band Scream, did Nirvana truly take shape. Krist wasn't the center. He stepped back, kept time, laid the foundation. But that's exactly what made Nirvana different. When Cobain was the storm, raging and chaotic, and Grohl the relentless engine, Krist was gravity. The one who kept the band from flying apart when everything else began to explode. Success didn't build slowly, it struck like lightning. Nevermind was released in 1991 with modest expectations, 50,000 copies. But within months, they had to halt production of all other albums just to press more Nevermind. and the world would never be the same again. But for Nirvana, success was never comfortable. Krist once said, "We used to live on $15 a day, and then just months later I could pay off my mom's debt, buy a used car, and stop sleeping on floors." But that feeling, it wasn't exactly joy. Because when a punk band climbs to the top of the world, they don't just carry instruments. They carry their inner conflicts, their self-doubt, and the haunting question, am I still myself? And that was only the beginning. Career success. Not Kurt Cobain. Not Dave Grohl. It was Krist Novoselic who played the very first notes of Smells Like Teen Spirit, the song that launched an entire era. Nevermind wasn't just a success. It was an explosion. From absolute obscurity, Nirvana shot straight to the top of the Billboard charts, dethroning Michael Jackson and turning anonymous rebels into cultural icons. Krist was never the one in the spotlight, but he was always present in those history-defining moments, the background pulse that powered a dream called grunge. From 1991 to 1994, Nirvana didn't just sell records, they rewrote the entire dictionary of 1990s rock. Nevermind sold 30 million copies worldwide. In Utero, released in 1993, hit number 1 on the Billboard charts and sold over 3.5 million copies in the US, despite its raw, anti-commercial sound. MTV Unplugged in New York, a legendary acoustic performance where Krist played upright bass, accordion, and even guitar, won a Grammy, and became one of the greatest live albums of all time. And in every one of those moments, was there. He co-wrote Polly with Kurt, a minimalist song that chills the spine. He played that airy, flowing acoustic bass on Come As You Are. He famously tossed his bass into the air during the 1992 MTV Awards, only to crash down onto the stage in front of millions he pretended to pass out. But that moment became iconic. Krist never shouted, didn't fight for the mic, but his bass lines, that tall swaying figure on stage, gave Nirvana its steady pulse amid the chaos. When Cobain screamed and Grohl pounded the drums, Krist's bass was the invisible thread holding everything together. He may not have been Nirvana's soul, but he was its musical spine. Without him, it would have all collapsed. It was also Krist who helped guide Nirvana into uncharted spaces. From small Seattle stages to the Reading Festival, from benefit concerts to public stands for artistic freedom. He didn't just play music, he understood its weight. In 2014, when Nirvana was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, stood center stage. No Cobain, no defiant glare, just gratitude and the echo of a bass line stretching back through time. "We never set out to become legends," he said. "We just wanted to be heard and to live through our music." And they did, not just for a generation, but for an entire culture. Tragedy. The cracks no one noticed. The day Kurt Cobain died, the headlines exploded, fans wept, and the rock world erupted in grief, arguments, and instant canonization of a man-turned-myth overnight. Krist Novoselic said nothing. No statement, no interviews, no defense of the band, no appearance at any of the loud memorials. He just disappeared. No one really knew where Krist was during those days. Some said he returned to live with family. Others claimed he buried himself in the studio. There were even rumors he had left music altogether. But one thing was certain. Krist was no longer the man he had been. Kurt wasn't just a bandmate. Was a friend, a brother. Someone Krist once said, "I always felt like I was trying to hold on to Kurt, even though I knew I couldn't." Kurt's death was a quiet collapse. It didn't explode like a tabloid headline. It corroded day by day, and Krist, the quietest one in Nirvana, was perhaps the one who carried that blow the deepest and the longest. It was also the first time he truly lost direction outside of music. In 1999, divorced his wife, the woman who'd been with him since the days of sleeping in vans and playing dive bars. No scandal, no accusations, just nothing left to hold on to. The world saw him as the one who survived. But Krist knew. A part of his soul had died on April 5, 1994. Then in 2020, Krist's name suddenly resurfaced in the media. Not for music, but politics. A Facebook post saying he thought President Trump spoke powerfully and clearly during the riots was twisted, shared hundreds of thousands of times, and turned him from an independent artist into a so-called fascist sympathizer. Krist had to step back again. He deleted Twitter, locked down Facebook, and left just one line behind. "I don't support fascism." I just believe in a society that listens. Beneath that calm exterior, not many people seem to see it. Krist is the kind of person who's always trying to keep the balance. In a world where everything either soars or crashes, he chooses to stay still, not out of fear, but because he knows some things only shatter more when touched. And often, the ones who never speak of their pain are the ones who carry it the most. A path of his own, without the spotlight. After Nirvana, people expected Krist Novoselic to launch a new supergroup, start a blockbuster project, or at the very least embark on an epic solo journey. But he chose none of those. He formed Sweet 75, a strange band with a sound both brooding and folksy, where he played bass while a Venezuelan singer took the lead. No one quite understood it. No one really remembered it, and Krist didn't care. To him, music wasn't about fame. It was the only way to keep going. In 2002, Krist returned with Eyes Adrift, joining Kurt Kirkwood, Meat Puppets, and Bud Gaw, Sublime. For the first time, Krist sang lead on a few songs, as if testing himself, stepping out of the support role and into the light. But after just one album, the band dissolved. He had no regrets. Amid the occasional surprise appearance, playing with Foo Fighters, joining a tribute music video for Kurt, or performing with Paul McCartney on Cut Me Some Slack, Krist continued to lead an oddly simple life, flying small planes, growing vegetables, DJing for a community station, and living on a farm in Deep River. From 2017 to 2020, he played with Giants in the Trees, a quirky indie band. Their first song, Sasquatch, came with a music video Krist jokingly called a $2 million production shot on an old phone. He sang backup, played accordion, wrote songs, and let everything unfold without worry. By 2022, he formed Third Secret with Kim Thiel, Soundgarden, Matt Cameron, Pearl Jam, and a few longtime friends. No press, no publicity. They quietly recorded in a woodshop in Washington and released the album online, as if the whole grunge generation was having one last gathering without needing an audience. Krist never called it a comeback because he never left music. He just chose the path no one was watching so he could hold on to the only thing that mattered, the truth. Politics, an artist who refused to stand on the sidelines. In an industry where artists often choose silence to protect their market, Krist Novoselic did the opposite. He stepped off the stage, but not out of life. In 1992, when Washington state proposed a bill to label certain rock albums as pornographic, Krist, alongside Nirvana, publicly opposed it. They organized a protest concert, appeared on national TV to defend artistic freedom. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a political statement from artists who actually meant what they played. From there, Krist gradually took a turn no one saw coming into social and civic politics. He founded Jampack, a political action committee for musicians and artists fighting for youth rights and popular culture. He didn't speak from polished podiums, but from community gatherings, rural fairs, and local radio stations. When electoral reform gained momentum, he joined the board of Fair Vote and became one of its most vocal advocates, pushing for ranked choice voting, proportional representation, and greater civic transparency. He wrote a book of grunge in government, penned op-eds, ran for office, and then stepped away because he never wanted to be a professional politician. He ran to prove one thing: politics isn't just for smooth talkers. It's for people who live their truth. In 2020, a Facebook post commenting on Trump's speech sparked a storm. The media ran with headlines. Social media erupted. Krist deleted his accounts, then quietly said, "I don't support fascism. I don't belong to any party. I believe in dialogue." No further defense. No arguments like his music. He only spoke when it truly mattered. By 2023, he joined the Forward Party and co-founded the Cascade Party of Washington, a local low-profile initiative with no races to win, no media to please, just a quiet attempt to restore a belief that an artist can still help change society by the way they choose to live. Legacy and influence. No one calls Krist Novoselic a genius. He didn't write Smells Like Teen Spirit, never stood front and center with angel wings under the spotlight. But without him, Nirvana would have remained two broken halves: Kurt Cobain, all contradictions and torment, and Dave Grohl, young and ferocious, with no one in between to hold the pieces together. Krist was the baseline that kept Nirvana alive. No showboating, no fight for the spotlight. But every pluck of his strings in Come As You Are, Lithium, or Polly was a quiet heartbeat that gave grunge its soul. He was the only one who could stand between the light and the dark without being consumed by either. His legacy isn't in technical solos, but in the fact that he chose to stay when everyone else moved on. When Kurt died, Dave formed Foo Fighters. Pat Smear toured the world. Krist stayed silent, vanished, as if holding on to the memory the rest of the world was trying to bury. He never wrote a tell-all memoir, never made a documentary to reveal the truth. He simply kept living, kept making music, kept quietly upholding what Nirvana once stood for. Honesty, no pretenses, and a refusal to bow to the market. In 2014, when Nirvana was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Krist took the stage with Dave and Pat. Like three survivors of a storm that could never come again, he bowed his head, spoke little, everyone knew. No one was more worthy to accept that honor on Kurt's behalf. Then in 2023, when receiving the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, he appeared once again. Salt and pepper hair, that calm, steady gaze. He didn't dwell on the past, because to Krist, the past isn't something to glorify, it's something to protect, like an ancient forest. No need for signs or monuments. Just don't let it be cut down. Krist's legacy doesn't live in statues. It lives in the quiet echo of artists who choose truth over fame, loyalty over attention, and the courage to keep living instead of trying to live forever in the spotlight. Among the thousands of bassists who've passed through the history of rock, Krist Novoselic stands as an exception. No technical showmanship, no attempt to become a symbol, no clinging to the spotlight, not even for a second. He did one thing, and did it well. He kept the rhythm so others could be fully themselves. For Kurt Cobain, that meant listening without judgment. For Dave Grohl, it meant providing the silence needed to start over. For the audience, it was a quiet reminder. You don't have to scream to be remembered. Krist didn't stay in Nirvana for fame. He stayed for friendship. Just as later, he didn't keep making music for contracts, but because his heart still had something to say. Even if it was through a country tune, a folk rock ballad in the woods, or the sound of an accordion on a nameless afternoon. And perhaps the most beautiful thing he left behind isn't a hit song, a speech, or a best-selling album, but a quiet, unshakable presence in a music world increasingly swept up in performance, profit, and spectacle. Nirvana, the name still shakes the world more than 3 decades later. But if you want to understand why it's still alive, you have to look at the man who quietly held his bass in the background, needing no glory, speaking only when it mattered. That man is Krist Novoselic, the last one still keeping time for the memory. If you believe that quiet souls like Krist deserve to be heard more, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow our channel for more untold stories still sleeping behind the curtains of rock history. Because sometimes the ones who step back are the very ones who keep everything alive.